The shocking truth about the descendants of Cain. Cain was the first human ever to be born from another human being. Unfortunately, his life and the lives of his descendants were marked by tragedy, curses, and even murder. It may surprise some people to learn that the Bible describes several instances of curses. After the fall of man, Adam, Eve, and the snake were cursed. Eve then gave birth to her sons. Now the man Adam knew Eve as his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have obtained a man, baby boy, son, with the help of the Lord. Genesis 4:1. Adam had an intimate relationship with his wife Eve, and when she gave birth to Cain, she acknowledged that it was only possible with the Lord's help. Eve named him Cain, which means acquisition, and she may have thought that he was the promised seed. Eve likely believed that Cain was the promised seed of God who would come from her and defeat the serpent. She may have believed Cain was the Messiah who would save the world. However, in reality, she was holding a murderer in her arms. Abel presented the firstborn of his flock as a sacrifice, while Cain offered the fruit of the ground. Genesis 4:6-9. And the Lord said to Cain, Why are you so angry? And why do you look annoyed? If you do well, believing me and doing what is acceptable and pleasing to me, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, but ignore my instructions, sin crouches at your door. Its desire is for you to overpower you, but you must master it. Cain talked with Abel, his brother, about what God had said. And when they were alone, working in the field, Cain attacked Abel, his brother, and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel, your brother? And he lied and said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? God says, Where is Abel, your brother? God knew the answer to the question he asked Cain. He asked Cain to give him a chance to confess his sin and make up for it. Cain tried to deceive God, but it was pointless. He was foolish to think that God didn't know where Abel was or that he could hide his sin from God. Cain says, Am I my brother's keeper? Cain is known for the act of killing his brother Abel, even though he was supposed to protect him. The motive behind his violent act was jealousy, as he was envious of his brother's success. Cain had not suffered any harm from Abel, but he still took his life out of spiritual jealousy. Jude 11 issues a warning about the way of Cain, which includes unbelief, false religion leading to jealousy, persecution of those who are truly godly, and ultimately, murderous anger. God's curse upon Cain. Genesis 4:10-12. The Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's innocent blood is crying out to me from the ground for justice. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's shed blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength. It will resist producing good crops for you. You shall be a fugitive and a vagabond, roaming aimlessly on the earth in perpetual exile, without a home, a degraded outcast. Cain's jealous rage culminated in his brother Abel's murder. However, Abel still conveys that a life of faith is what matters. When an unrepentant, insolent reply met the Lord's loving question, he pronounced Cain's judgment. He would no longer be able to make a living from the soil, but would wander as a fugitive in the desert. The blood of Abel spoke, and it spoke of judgment. The blood of Jesus speaks but of better things, of grace and of sin having been judged. Hebrews 12:24. And to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant uniting God and man, and to the sprinkled blood which speaks of mercy, a better and nobler and more gracious message than the blood of Abel, which cried out for vengeance. The way blessings and curses work is not random or hard to predict. On the contrary, both of them operate according to eternal, unchanging laws. To the Bible, once again, we must look for a correct understanding of these laws. In Proverbs 26:2, Solomon establishes this principle concerning curses. A curse without cause shall not be a light. Behind every curse, there is a cause. Proverbs 26:2. Like the sparrow in her wandering, like the swallow in her flying, so the curse without cause does not come and alight on the undeserving. Genesis 4:13-15. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the land, and from your face presence I will be hidden. And I will be a fugitive and an aimless vagabond on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. And the Lord said to him, Therefore whoever kills Cain, a sevenfold vengeance, that is, punishment 7 times worse, shall be taken on him by me. And the Lord set a protective mark, sign, on Cain, so that no one who found or met him would kill him. Cain's complaint was not a genuine expression of guilt for his sin, but rather a lamentation for the consequences that followed. Even so, the Lord placed a protective mark on Cain to ensure his safety and cursed anyone who would harm him. Cain left the presence of the Lord, saddened by his banishment. As a result, God marked Cain with a sign that would serve as a safeguard and identify him. Although many have speculated about the nature of this mark, its exact nature remains unknown. The nature of the mark on Cain has been a topic of debate and speculation. The Hebrew word for mark is auth, which denotes a mark, sign, or token. In other parts of the Hebrew scriptures, auth is used 79 times and is most commonly translated as sign. According to the Hebrew word, it's unclear what exactly God's mark on Cain was. However, it was a sign that indicated that Cain should not be killed. While some people think that the mark was a scar or a tattoo on Cain's body, the specific nature of the mark is not the main focus of the passage. Rather, the focus is on how God would prevent people from taking revenge against Cain. Whatever the mark on Cain was, it served this purpose. The suffering of Cain, the firstborn son, is a pattern that repeats itself, starting from his father Adam to Esau and Ishmael. Cain moves away and marries. Genesis 4:16-17. So Cain went away from the manifested presence of the Lord and lived in the land of Nod, wandering in exile, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, one of Adam's descendants, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And Cain built a city and named it Enoch, after the name of his son. The identity of a certain woman mentioned in the Bible has puzzled many Christians. The question that remains unanswered is who this wife was and where she came from. However, the Bible provides some clues that can help us solve this mystery. One thing we know for sure is that Adam and Eve had many children. The Bible says, After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Genesis 5:4. The verse suggests that Adam and Eve had many children besides Cain, Abel, and Seth. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that Cain married one of his sisters or a close relative. However, in modern times, marrying a close relative is generally considered unacceptable due to the potential genetic complications, but it was a common practice in early human history. Cain married his sister or other blood relatives, and Genesis 5:4 specifically states that Adam had sons and daughters. Marriage of close relatives was not forbidden then, nor was it genetically risky. It wasn't until much later, in the book of Leviticus, that God set down laws prohibiting close interfamily marriages. It was when God gave the people the law of Moses that he established laws forbidding a man from marrying a sister or niece. None of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him to uncover his nakedness. I am the Lord. Leviticus 18:6. Before God forbade certain types of marriage, there were no restrictions on who could get married. However, once God forbade certain relationships, it became forbidden to marry one's mother, father, sister, brother, half-brother, brother's wife, aunt, uncle, stepmother, granddaughter, daughter-in-law, or son-in-law. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, that is, the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your sister, either the daughter of your father or of your mother, whether born at home or born elsewhere. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter. Their nakedness you shall not uncover, for they are your own nakedness, that is, your own descendants. During the time of Moses, God prohibited the practice of intermarriages to prevent the risk of producing deformed offspring from such a union. This commandment also ensured the future health of the nations of Israel. Moreover, this commandment strengthened the family's unity structure by discouraging such practices. Time not stated. It is important to note that the Bible does not provide any information about when Cain killed Abel or the age at which this murder occurred. The scripture merely states that it happened at the end of days. It is not necessary to assume that Cain and Abel were young men or teenagers at the time. If each of them were over 50 years old, there could have been a significant number of people living during that time. This is supported by the fact that Adam and Eve had many more sons and daughters besides Cain and Abel. Genesis 5:3-4. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. After he became the father of Seth, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. The Bible states that Adam was 130 years old when Seth was born, and he lived for another 800 years. God had promised to greatly multiply Eve's conception. In Jewish tradition, it is believed that Adam had 33 sons and 23 daughters. This implies that many people were living during the time of Cain and Abel. It has been estimated that around 32,000 people could have been alive when this tragic event occurred. Long lifespans. The book of Genesis chapter 5 describes the long lifespans of Adam's descendants. If we assume that each couple gave birth to children for only half of their lifespan, then the population at the time of Adam's death could have been quite large. Furthermore, the genealogy in Genesis 5 indicates that every descendant of Adam up to Lamech had other sons and daughters. Taking these facts into account, finding a wife for Cain would not have been a problem. Before his banishment, Cain would have had many women to choose from to take as a wife. According to the Bible, during Noah's time there were no other people around except Noah's family. As a result, his grandchildren had no choice but to marry either their siblings or first cousins. This is mentioned in 1 Peter 3:20 and Genesis 7:7. In addition, it is worth noting that Abraham married his half-sister, as mentioned in Genesis 22 and 12. Isaac, on the other hand, married his cousin Bethuel's daughter Rebekah. Jacob, who was Leah and Rachel's cousin, married both of them. Therefore, it is evident that the Bible did not prohibit the marriage of close relatives until the time of Moses. Genesis 20:12. Besides, she actually is my half-sister. She is the daughter of my father Terah, but not of my mother, and she became my wife. Based on the information provided in the Bible, it's unclear who Cain marries. However, we can make an educated guess that he most likely wed one of his close relatives. Given the fact that Adam and Eve had many children, it's most likely that Cain married one of his close relatives. According to Genesis 4:14, Cain feared for his life after killing Abel, which implies that there were already other descendants of Adam and Eve living in the world. The fact that Adam and Eve had many other children before Cain took a wife is mentioned in Genesis 5:4. It is highly probable that there were not only children but also grandchildren of Adam and Eve living at the time of Abel's death. We read, "And he built a city." The beginning of industry and urbanization can be seen here. Man-centered from the start, the city was named after his son's name, not God-centered. The fall of the human race continued and even increased. The generations following Cain. Genesis 4:18-22. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael became the father of Methushael, and Methushael became the father of Lamech. And Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He became the father of those nomadic herdsmen who live in tents and have cattle and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He became the father of all those musicians who play the lyre and flute. Zillah gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the smith, craftsman, and teacher of every artisan in instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. According to Cain's genealogy, Lamech was the 6th child from Adam, and his name possibly means conqueror in Hebrew. However, his arrogance is in stark contrast to the godliness of Enoch, who is the 6th from Adam and Seth's line. Lamech, a character from biblical history, named his wives and daughters to reflect his cultural emphasis on physical and outward beauty. The name Ada means pleasure, ornament, or beauty, while Zillah means shade, likely referring to a luxurious covering of hair. Lamech's daughter was named Naamah, which means loveliness. Lamech's arrogant boast. Genesis 4:23-24. Lamech said to his wives, "Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. For I have killed a man merely for wounding me, and a boy only for striking, bruising me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, as the Lord said he would be, then Lamech will be avenged 77-fold. Lamech boasted about his murder of another, and the way he believed he could promise more significant retribution than God demonstrates a gradual degeneration among humankind. The human race experienced rapid deterioration, which can be described as devolution. We read, "If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold." This is all representation of a man-centered perspective. The city was Cain's city. The focus of Lamech was his beautiful wives and perceived strength. But for all of Lamech's boasting, neither he nor his descendants are ever heard of again in the Bible. He came to nothing. Sometimes curses may come from previous generations. Does that mean there is no hope? Does the human race continue like this? No, there is hope. As we move on, we discover that God has provided a remedy. The most notable member of Cain's descendants is the boastful Lamech. The 21 words of his speech constitute what is often considered an example of earliest poetry. Since the beginning of various aspects of civilization is highlighted in this section, the exchange of blows perhaps denotes the start of war among humans. Interestingly, with all the beginning cited in this passage, there is no origin of kingship. This is of special interest since, in the records from the ancient Near East, kingship was one of the most significant developments within civilization. City building, multiple wives, and initiation of warfare are three elements most consistently associated with kings in ancient literature. In Genesis 4, Lamech is most closely associated with typical actions linked with kingship. The text moves from unrepentant Cain to defiant Lamech. Violence is glorified, and the mark of Cain no longer stands as a stigma of exile, but as a badge of honor that offers protection equal to invulnerability. Verses 17 through 24 list Cain's posterity and a series of firsts. The first city, named Enoch. The first case of polygamy. The beginning of organized animal husbandry. The beginning of the art of music and of metal crafts. The first song concerning violence and bloodshed. In the song, Lamech explains to his wives that he killed a young man in self-defense, but that because it wasn't premeditated like Cain's murder of his brother, Lamech would be much more immune from reprisal. In this recorded speech of Lamech, it appears that he was a wicked man. Firstly, he speaks to his wives in a haughty manner, expecting great regard and observance. "Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech." Secondly, he was brutal and bloodthirsty towards those around him. "I have slain, or I would slay a man in my wound and a young man in my hurt." He admits to having a fierce spirit. As the family of Cain perpetuated more rebellion against God, the line of Cain built the city of man. This project reached a climax later with the building of the Tower of Babel. Both then and now, men without God are driven towards building great empires in defiance of God. They typically consolidate power to establish a government that is empty of Christ's rule. Since Cain built his first city, this has been the passion of men who run from God. Consider also the further rebellion of Lamech, Cain's great-great-great-grandson. Over a century after God's declaration against Cain, Lamech continued to mock and twist God's word. How does this passage teach us to walk with God in faith and obedience? The life of a vagabond, the wanderer, and the stranger is cursed. It is a life empty of long-term relationships, accountability, and an authentic community. It is very much the picture of a life in the modern city. As men build their cities and roam from community to community, they gradually give up on maintaining close relationships and accountability. A heart that constantly seeks to stray from relationships with God and with brothers and sisters is not one we should desire. They become increasingly comfortable in their world of anonymity. Instead, let us strive to have good relationships with our families and churches. This is all we know about the family and posterity of cursed Cain, until we find them all wiped out in the universal flood. Genesis 4:25 through 26. Adam knew Eve as his wife again, and she gave birth to a son, and named him Seth. For she said, "God has granted another child for me in place of Abel, because Cain killed him." To Seth also a son was born, whom he named Enosh, mortal man, mankind. At that same time, men began to call on the name of the Lord and worship through prayer, praise, and thanksgiving. After this terrible story of disobedience in Cain's line, the chapter ends with a light of hope. In contrast to Cain's line, God selected a new family tree. God gave Eve a son named Seth in place of Abel. Seth illustrated the same type of worship as his deceased brother Abel, as people started to invoke the Lord's name in connection with Seth. Prideful worship, as practiced by Cain, points to himself. Humble worship, as practiced by Abel and Seth, calls out to God. Jude 11. Woe to them, for they have gone the defiant way of Cain, and for profit they have run headlong into the error of Balaam, and perished in the rebellion of mutinous Korah. It's no surprise that when God needed an obedient servant hundreds of years later, he chose Noah from Seth's line. The Kenites. Who were the Kenites? The Kenites were a people who lived near Canaan during the time of Abraham. Genesis 15:18-21, Amplified Bible. On the same day, the Lord made a covenant, promise, pledge with Abraham, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaim, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. The Bible describes positive interactions between the Israelites and the Kenites. Jethro, who is also known as Reuel, was Moses' father-in-law and a Kenite priest, Judges 1:16. Jethro resided south of Canaan near Mount Sinai, Exodus 3:1. When Moses fled from Egypt, he traveled to Midian, where he met Jethro's 7 daughters, who were all shepherdesses. Moses eventually married one of them, a woman named Zipporah, Exodus 2:16-21, thus becoming part of the Kenite tribe. Moses resided with the Kenites for several years before being chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. It appears that the Kenites, who lived in Midian, had enough knowledge about the one true God that they maintained a priest. Reuel, whose name means friend of God, was their priest. After the Exodus, Reuel's knowledge of God increased significantly, and he joined Moses and Aaron in burning burnt sacrifices and other offerings to the Lord as an act of worship. Exodus 18:9-12, Amplified Bible. Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done to Israel, and that he had rescued them from the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord who has rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and from the hand of Pharaoh, who has rescued the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. Indeed, it was proven when they acted insolently towards Israel, and the Lord showed himself infinitely superior to all their gods. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. It seems likely that the Kenites and the Midianites had some kind of relationship. Reuel, who Moses met, lived in Midian. In Numbers 10:29, Moses' father-in-law is referred to as Reuel the Midianite, although he is also identified as a Kenite in other parts of the Bible. Additionally, the tribe of the Rechabites is linked to the Kenites in 1 Chronicles 2:55. During the Exodus, the Kenites were friendly and hospitable to Moses and the Israelites. It is believed that Jethro, Hobab, and many other Kenites accompanied Moses and his followers all the way to Canaan, Exodus 18:1-7, Numbers 10:29-33. After settling near Jericho for a while, the Kenites eventually migrated southward to inhabit the desert regions of Negev, Judges 1:16, 1 Samuel 27:10. In the book of Judges, we learn about a Kenite named Heber, who migrated north to near Kadesh. During the time of Deborah and Barak, Sisera, a commander of the Canaanite army, was killed by Heber's wife Jael. Judges 4:11, 17-23. During the reign of King Saul, God commanded Israel to destroy the Amalekites. However, the Kenites, who lived among the Amalekites, showed kindness to the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So, before Saul attacked, he instructed the Kenites to leave the Amalekites so they would not be destroyed along with them. 1 Samuel 15:6. There are some who believe that the Kenites were descendants of Cain. This belief stems from the similarity between the Hebrew words that are translated as Cain and Kenite. However, this claim is not accurate. According to the Bible, the flood wiped out all of Cain's descendants unless someone in Noah's family was a descendant of Cain. Even if a member of Noah's family was a descendant of Cain, there would be no way for a distinct line of Cain to re-emerge after the flood. For instance, if Ham's wife was a descendant of Cain, then all of Ham's descendants would be descendants of Cain. Despite this, it is essential to note that the Bible does not associate the Kenites with Cain. How could there be descendants of Cain after the flood? The biblical authors made reference to a people group known as the Kenites, who were believed to be associated with Cain even after the flood. Although this connection may not be immediately apparent in our English translations, the term used in Hebrew is the same for both and serves to link the Kenites with Cain. It is possible that Cain's descendants survived the flood by intermarrying with the descendants of Seth, Noah's ancestor. It is also worth noting that the Bible does not specify the origins of Noah's wives or his sons' wives, and it is possible that they were descendants of Cain. There is a third possibility that some believe in relation to the story of the flood in the Bible. This view suggests that there were two groups of people who were present after the flood, even though they were not supposed to be there. These two groups are the Kenites and the Nephilim. According to this view, the description of the flood as covering all the earth in the Bible is not meant to be taken literally. Instead, it is believed to be hyperbole used to describe a catastrophic flood that had a specific purpose. That purpose was to undo or decreate the world so that Yahweh could restore order to creation. It is suggested that the flood did not need to destroy all of humanity to achieve this purpose literally. Some rabbinical commentators such as Rashi have presented theories about Cain's death. An extra-biblical midrash suggests that Lamech, who was blind, accidentally killed Cain while hunting with his son. According to extra-biblical literature, there's another theory regarding Cain's death. The theory suggests that a stone house fell on Cain, killing him. The Book of Jubilees claims that Cain was rightfully punished for murdering his brother Abel. The text states, "For with a stone he had killed Abel, and by a stone he was killed in righteous judgment." Book of Jubilees 4:31. However, it is essential to note that the scripture never explicitly mentions how Cain died. Therefore, any explanation regarding his death is mere speculation.
Why did Lot's daughters lie down with her own father? We first meet Lot in Genesis chapter 11, verse 31. Abraham had left his father's house on God's command and had left with his nephew Lot. Abram and Lot had to separate and go in different directions. One would expect Abram, who received God's promise, to have the first choice. However, he generously allowed Lot to choose first. Lot's decision was based only on materialistic considerations, and he chose the land with the most resources. Abram's decision to allow Lot to choose first was a faith-based decision, with Abram focusing on spiritual matters, such as God's promise, rather than temporal ones. Lot made a choice that was utterly self-centered. He parted ways with Abram and set his sights on Sodom. As Lot gazed upon the land, his eyes settled on the vast expanse of the Jordan Valley. It was a sight to behold, teeming with life and bounty. The waters were plentiful, nourishing the soil and all it bore. This valley, in its abundance and beauty, was reminiscent of the Lord's own garden. Lot made his choice to set up his camp close to Sodom, a place infamous for its residents' grievous sins against the Lord. As we delve deeper into the story, the full extent of their corruption comes to light. Here, we see a stark difference between Lot and Abram. While Abram followed God's guidance, looking wherever God directed, Lot took it upon himself to look and choose based on his desires. Lot was lured by the promise of prosperity and ease, enticed into settling in a land that jeopardized his honorable integrity and spiritual teachings. This decision led him into an environment that threatened to rot the values he had learned about the God worshipped by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He stood at a crossroads, facing a choice between material wealth and spiritual fidelity. And regrettably, he allowed the allure of temporary gains to cloud his judgment. By Genesis chapter 19, at least 25 years have passed since Lot and his family made their departure from Haran. Furthermore, it has been approximately 15 years since Lot went his separate way from Abraham. At this point in the story, Lot, along with his family, has become deeply integrated into the life of the city of Sodom. Lot has climbed the social ladder and has secured a position of authority within the community. His daughters, too, have established their own connections within the city, being betrothed to local men, suggesting they have reached the latter years of their young lives. However, the worst was yet to come. Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Lot's life saw a gradual decline as he kept compromising. He went from looking towards Sodom, Genesis chapter 13 verse 10, to pitching his tent toward Sodom, Genesis chapter 13 verse 12, to eventually living in Sodom, Genesis chapter 14 verse 12. Unfortunately, he lost everything when Sodom was attacked. Now, after returning to the infamous city, Lot was seen sitting in the gate of Sodom, which indicated that he had become a civic leader. The gate area of an ancient city was like a community center where the city's respected leaders would come together. They would settle arguments, talk over important matters, and keep an eye on everyone coming in or going out of the city. Lot was a good and moral man who felt troubled by the wrongdoing he saw all around him. Despite being a good person, Lot lived in Sodom and Gomorrah, places filled with evil, and this troubled him deeply every day. He was disturbed by the sin around him, yet he didn't take strong enough steps to remove himself and his family from that bad environment. This shows us that it's not enough to be upset by wrongdoing. We must also take action to avoid being part of it. Lot made a big mistake that had serious consequences. He compromised his beliefs, and as a result, he lost the respect of his family and friends. Lot was very insistent when he invited the visitors into his home. Usually, it was common to offer hospitality to guests, but the way Lot did it was different. He was extremely eager and urgent in his invitation. This shows us that sometimes the way we do something can be just as important as what we are doing. Genesis chapter 19 verses 4 through 5. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them." The people of Sodom had no respect or consideration for their two guests. They ignored every rule of kindness and decency, driven by their own cruel and wrongful desires. We read, "The men of the city, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house." This demonstrates that the whole city was engulfed in violence and immorality. It wasn't something out of the ordinary. Rather, it was a common practice among the men of Sodom. Later on, in the book of Ezekiel chapter 16, God expressed strong disapproval of Judah's significant wrongdoing during the later years of the divided kingdom. He likened Jerusalem to the old city of Sodom, calling them akin to sisters. God then drew a parallel between the wrongdoings of Sodom and the sins being committed in Jerusalem during that era. Behold, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters, outlying cities, had arrogance, abundant food, and careless ease, but she did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and committed repulsive acts before me. Therefore I removed them when I saw it. Ezekiel chapter 16 verses 49 through 50. The message we get from the Ezekiel passage isn't just listing the sins of Sodom, like being proud, lazy, or unfair to the poor, as the only reasons they faced judgment. These were sins that Sodom had, but Jerusalem, another city, was guilty of them too. When we look at Genesis, it's clear that God was upset about more than just those sins. He was also deeply troubled by the terrible acts of sexual violence and immorality happening in Sodom. The phrase committed abomination in Ezekiel likely includes these sins too. So the lesson here is about recognizing and turning away from all kinds of wrongs, not just a few. We read, that we may know them carnally. The sin of the men of Sodom was plainly connected to this. Lot bargains for the life and safety of his guests. Genesis chapter 19 verses 6 through 9. But Lot went out of the doorway to the men and shut the door after him and said, Please, my brothers, do not do something so wicked. See here, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man intimately. Please, let me bring them out to you instead, and you can do as you please with them. Only do nothing to these men, because they have in fact come under the shelter of my roof for protection. But they said, Get out of the way. And they said, This man Lot came as an outsider to live here temporarily, and now he is acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than your visitors. So they rushed forward and pressed violently against Lot, and came close to breaking down the door of his house. Lot faced a tough challenge in getting his point across. He believed in a different sense of right and wrong compared to the men of Sodom. These men were chasing after what they thought was fun, paying no mind to Lot's warnings that their actions were wrong. The first incident involving Lot's daughters appears in Genesis chapter 19 verses 1 through 11. Scripture does not reveal Lot's reasoning for offering up his daughters. Whatever his thought process was, it was wrong and indefensible. Based on what is revealed about Lot's life, one might wonder if he was righteous. However, there is no doubt that God had declared him to be positionally righteous, even during his time in Sodom. Lot meant to appease the men of Sodom, so that the hospitality of his house would not be damaged. But he makes the wrong choice in offering his own daughters, and God's messengers overruled him. Lot's decision to offer his daughters to the crowd was appalling and indefensible. The behavior of the Sodomites was a horrifying display of moral decay. Yet we find ourselves equally horrified by Lot's readiness to sacrifice his own daughters to satisfy the crowd. This appalling willingness mirrors the crowd's own reprehensible desires. To grasp the full gravity of this narrative, it's crucial to recognize the societal context of those times. Women were undervalued in the pre-Christian era, not afforded the respect and dignity they deserved. Conversely, the value placed on a guest's safety was extraordinarily high. Within this cultural framework, the protection of a guest was often prioritized above the well-being of one's own family members, reflecting a distorted understanding of hospitality and duty. This one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting like a judge. The men of Sodom mocked Lot and rejected his feeble efforts to provide moral and spiritual leadership. Perhaps Lot thought that through compromise, he might have reached these men, but the opposite happened. They had no respect for him whatsoever, even though his friendly first approach led him to call such wicked men my brethren. Genesis chapter 19, verses 10 through 11. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, from the small to the great, so that they became weary of trying to find the doorway. It must have taken significant, perhaps supernatural strength to do what the angels did at the door. Probably for the first time, Lot understood that his guests were more than men. The work of striking the blind men was supernatural. Now, the mob's physical blindness matched its moral blindness. Genesis chapter 19, verses 12 through 14. And the two men, angels, asked Lot, "Have you any others here in Sodom, a son-in-law, and your sons and your daughters? Whomever you have in the city, take them out of here, for we are destroying this place, because the outcry for judgment against them has grown so great before the Lord, that the Lord has sent us to destroy and ruin it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were betrothed and legally promised to marry his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy this city." But to his sons-in-law he appeared to be joking. This was the beginning of Lot's daughters' sins. Their soon-to-be husbands decided not to come with them. They are going to be left behind, because the angels are telling Lot he needs to hurry up and get out of Sodom before it's too late. The angels literally had to drag Lot out of the city early in the morning. Of course, the Lord was being merciful by sparing Lot for Abraham's sake. Lot is debased by his daughters. Genesis chapter 19, verse 30. Now Lot went up from Zoar and lived in the mountain together with his two daughters, for he was afraid to stay any longer in Zoar, and he lived in a cave with his two daughters. Lot and his daughters were not happy in Zoar, for reasons we don't understand, and it seems the people of Zoar were not happy with them either. So they decided to leave Zoar and move to the mountains, where they lived in a cave. Despite losing everything when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, Lot and his family soon had wine. They either took the wine with them from their previous home or they found it in Zoar. Here's the situation with Lot. After he managed to escape a terrible disaster, he found himself in a whole new set of troubles. Here's what went down. Lot couldn't stay in Zoar, a place he initially thought would be safe. He was terrified to live there for a few reasons. First, he might have realized that choosing Zoar was his idea, not God's. He had made his own plan instead of trusting God's guidance, which probably made him feel insecure about his safety there. Secondly, he might have noticed that the people in Zoar were just as bad as those he had left behind in Sodom, which would make any righteous person uncomfortable. He might have thought, if God didn't spare Sodom, why would Zoar be any different? Lastly, there was a practical danger. After the disaster, water levels, possibly from the Jordan River, started rising, threatening to flood the plain. This water, mixing with the leftover debris, gradually created what we now know as the Dead Sea. Lot figured that if this water was swallowing up everything else, Zoar was doomed too, despite having dodged the initial catastrophe. The key takeaway here is pretty straightforward. When we make decisions based on our own judgment without seeking God's direction, we often end up in tough spots. Choosing our paths without considering His guidance can lead us into situations that feel unstable and insecure. He found himself compelled to seek refuge in the mountains, selecting a cave as his dwelling place. It seems odd that he didn't go back to Abraham for protection, a man who had twice saved him before. However, it's true that even some good people don't always make the wisest choices for their well-being. Now he felt relieved to retreat to the mountain. The man who once struggled to find sufficient space for himself and his livestock across the entire land, competing with Abraham for territory and aiming to distance himself as much as possible, now found himself confined to a mere cave. There, he barely had space to move, living alone and in fear. Remember, God may deem it fair to limit and humble those who misuse their freedom and abundance. Furthermore, consider Lot's story as a cautionary tale. Those who abandon their spiritual community for worldly gains may ultimately suffer, ensnared by the consequences of their own choices. Genesis chapter 19, verses 31 through 32. The firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is aging, and there is not a man on earth available to be intimate with us in the customary way, so that we may have children. Come, let us make our father drunk with wine, and we will lie with him, so that we may preserve our family through our father." The firstborn was the one to hatch this plan. We read, "We will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." Lot might have thought he was a safe distance from Sodom, but Sodom was closer to him than ever. Sodom lied in the hearts of his own children. In a remote and lonely place, Lot and his daughters committed a serious wrongdoing. It is a sad story. The daughters concocted a sinful scheme to lead their father into transgression. Their sin was arguably more severe. They devised a plan to lift their father's spirits in his troubles and woes by intoxicating him, with the hidden agenda of engaging in outright sinful acts with him. They might have thought like Noah. They were the only survivors. Some may argue that the daughters had a seemingly justifiable reason. Their father lacked male heirs. They were without spouses, and they were uncertain of marrying into the esteemed lineage, fearing that their offspring from other men wouldn't carry on their father's legacy. They might have even pondered the hope that the Messiah would emerge from their lineage, as he was to be a descendant of Terah's lineage, akin to Abraham. With their mother and other family members no longer present, and the prohibition against marrying the detestable Canaanites, they rationalized their thoughts. Note, good intentions are often abused to patronize bad actions. Whatever their pretense was, it is certain that their project was very wicked and vile, and an impudent affront to the very light and law of nature. Let us consider the true nature of their actions. They were undeniably wicked, a blatant disrespect to the inherent moral laws. It's interesting to note that even the most severe punishments for committing sins don't deter people with corrupt hearts from continuing to do wrong. It's baffling how desires that should be eliminated can suddenly reappear, even in those who have recently witnessed catastrophic consequences for similar actions. This teaches us that without divine grace, the human heart is powerless to resist evil. It is important to understand that being alone can be just as dangerous as being with others, as it comes with its own set of temptations. This can be seen in the story of Joseph, who found himself at risk of sin when he was isolated with Potiphar's wife, as told in Genesis chapter 39, verse 11. It serves as a reminder that individuals, even family members, must be vigilant in guarding their thoughts and resisting any immoral impulse, especially when left in solitude. To keep the devil from gaining a foothold in our hearts, it's crucial that we remain on guard against sin every moment of our lives. This means we need to be watchful, not just when we're around others, but also when we're alone. We have to ask for God's help continuously to maintain our moral values and fight against the temptations of sin, no matter what situation we find ourselves in. It's a continuous battle, one that requires our attention and dedication at all times, to ensure that we don't let our guard down and allow the devil away into our hearts. Genesis chapter 19, verses 33 through 38. So they gave their father wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. And he did not know when she lay down or when she got up, because he was completely intoxicated. Then the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drunk with wine tonight also, and then you go in and lie with him, so that we may preserve our family through our father. So they gave their father wine that night also, and the younger got up and lay with him. And again, he did not know when she lay down or when she got up. Thus both the daughters of Lot conceived by their father. The firstborn gave birth to a son, and named him Moab, from father. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also gave birth to a son, and named him Ben-Ami, son of my people. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Lot, by his own foolish actions and lack of caution, found himself in a terribly unfortunate situation. He allowed himself to be tricked by his own children, resulting in him getting drunk on 2 consecutive nights and committing this great sin, as noted in Genesis chapter 19, verse 33. This prompts us to ask, what is the nature of humanity? Even the best among us can falter and make grave mistakes when they are not guided and supported by God. Listen closely and understand the danger of feeling too secure. Consider the story of Lot, a man who managed to live a righteous life in the corrupt city of Sodom. He avoided indulging in the vices of the city and deeply mourned its wickedness, standing strong against it. However, even Lot, when he retreated to a mountain, a place where he thought he'd be safe from temptation, found himself tragically succumbing to it. This teaches us a crucial lesson. Even if you believe you are standing tall, unshakable, and steadfast, you must always be cautious and vigilant. Remember, no place on earth, except for the sacred realms above, can fully shield us from the harmful temptations that lurk around, including those set by Satan himself. Now, let's talk about the danger of drunkenness. Understand that drunkenness isn't just a sin on its own. It's a gateway to numerous other sins, some of which can be exceptionally vile and damaging, potentially leaving lasting scars and dishonor. Remember, avoiding drunkenness isn't just about preventing a single sin. It's about protecting yourself from a cascade of wrongdoings that could follow. Always be mindful of the choices you make and the consequences they carry, especially when it comes to substances that could impair your judgment and lead you astray. The peril of being tempted by our closest family members and friends, those we cherish, respect, and anticipate kindness from is very real. Consider Lot, a man known for his self-control and moral integrity, who despite being resilient against external pressures, was deceived into wrongdoing by the very daughters he trusted. This teaches us that we must be cautious at all times and aware of the potential for betrayal, even in our most trusted circles. It's crucial to understand that temptation can come from the most unexpected places, and we should always be prepared to resist it. However, it's important to remember that even within the lineage of Judah, from which our Savior comes, there are instances of such births. Moreover, Ruth, who was from Moab, is also included in his family tree. This history does not justify the wrong, but shows that redemption and purpose can emerge from even troubled beginnings. Matthew chapter 1 verses 3 through 5. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahashon, and Nahashon the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. Observe that after this, we don't hear anything more about Lot or what happened to him. It's very likely that he felt sorry for his mistakes, asked for forgiveness, and received it. However, the fact that the Bible doesn't mention him anymore teaches us an important lesson about the effects of drinking too much. When people drink, they often forget what they should remember. But there's more. Society tends to forget them too. Many individuals who could have been remembered with admiration and respect are instead forgotten or remembered with disdain because of their drinking habits. This should be a warning to all of us about the dangers of alcohol and how it can not only harm our lives, but also affect how we are remembered. This might be an uncomfortable story to hear, and you might wonder, why is this in the Bible? But it's much better for young people to learn about right and wrong from the Bible, where bad actions are shown as bad, than to learn from rude words written on walls or from nasty stories. Everyone will find out about bad things at some point, but the Bible always makes it clear that God does not like sin and will punish it. It's strange but true that Lot, even though he was drunk, did the exact bad thing he had once talked about with the men of Sodom. He was with his daughters in a way he should not have been. They gave birth to boys, Moab and Ben-Ammi, whose descendants were the Moabites and Ammonites, perennial enemies of Israel. Moab sounds like the words from father, and Ben-Ammi means son of my kinsman. These etymologies perpetuated for Israel the ignominious beginning of these wicked enemies. The Ammonites? We find references to the Ammonite people throughout the early history of Israel. In the early chapters of Israel's story, we often come across the Ammonite people. These Ammonites shared a Semitic lineage with the Israelites. Yet despite this blood connection, they were more frequently foes than allies. During Moses' era, the lush lands along the Jordan River Valley were home to not just the Ammonites, but also the Amorites and Moabites. After Israel's exodus from Egypt, the Ammonites chose not to aid them. For this refusal to help, God rebuked the Ammonites. Yet when the Israelites were on the cusp of entering their promised land, God had clear directives. Do not provoke the Ammonites or engage in battle with them. I've not given you their land to possess, for I have allotted it to the descendants of Lot. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 19. The territories adjacent to the Ammonites fell under the domains of the Israelite tribes, Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, which were originally Amorite lands. Now the Ammonites adhered to paganism, venerating deities like Milcom and Molech. God explicitly instructed the Israelites to avoid marrying these pagans to prevent them from falling into the snare of idol worship. Yet King Solomon didn't heed this warning and took Naamah, an Ammonite, as his wife. This sin even affected Solomon down the line. Consequently, just as God had cautioned, Solomon was lured into the practice of idolatry. The deity Molech was particularly barbaric. Depicted as a fire god with a calf's face, his outstretched arms ready to receive infant sacrifices. The Ammonites, reflecting the savagery of their deity, exhibited extreme cruelty. For instance, when Nahash the Ammonite was negotiating a treaty, he demanded the mutilation of each Israelite man by removing their right eye. Furthermore, Amos chapter 1 verse 13 condemns the Ammonites for their vicious acts, like attacking women with children in the lands they aimed to dominate. Under the rule of King Saul, the nation of Israel emerged victorious against the Ammonites, bringing them under Israelite control as subjects. Following in Saul's footsteps, King David maintained dominance over the Ammonites, and he even went as far as laying siege to their capital city to ensure Israel's firm grip on power. However, after Israel and Judah went their separate ways, the Ammonites started to forge alliances with those who stood against Israel, signaling a shift in their loyalties and strategies. As we move forward in time to the 7th century BC, we see the Ammonites reclaiming some measure of independence, but this resurgence was short-lived. About a century later, Nebuchadnezzar, a powerful ruler, conquered them, reshaping their destiny. During the time when Persia ruled the region, a man named Tobiah, who hailed from Ammon, is mentioned in the scriptures as possibly overseeing the area. Yet the community he governed was diverse, composed not only of Ammonites, but also of Arabs and various other groups. By the time we reach the era described in the New Testament, Jews had established themselves in the region previously known as Ammon, now called Perea. This integration marked significant changes in the demographic and cultural landscape. The Ammonites, as a distinct people, last appeared in historical records in the 2nd century, mentioned by Justin Martyr, who observed their considerable numbers. However, during the Roman era, a notable transformation occurred. The Ammonites gradually merged with the Arab population, effectively blending into the broader tapestry of the region's societies. They also gave birth to the Moabites. The Moabites were a tribe descended from Moab, the son of Lot, born of an unacceptable relationship with his oldest daughter. Their beginnings were in Zoar, a land nestled by the southeastern shores of the Dead Sea, wherefrom they spread their reach eastward beyond the Jordan River. As time marched on, the landscape of their world shifted. The Amorites, as when the Israelites embarked on their legendary exodus, they skirted Moab, traversing the rugged wilderness to the east, moving toward lands north of the Arnon. But the Moabites, stricken with fear at this migration, and their king Balak, felt a deep unease. In their distress, they turned for help to the Midianites, kindling an alliance against the tide of change. let's focus on a truly remarkable figure from the Bible who originated from Moab, and her name is Ruth. She was born among the Moabites, yet she shares a connection with Israel through her ancestor Lot, Abraham's nephew, as stated in Genesis chapter 11, verse 31. Ruth stands as a powerful testament to how the Almighty can transform someone's life, guiding it along a path He has sovereignly chosen. We witness the unfolding of God's flawless design in Ruth's journey, a manifestation of His divine intervention that He extends to all His beloved children. Despite her roots being entrenched in the pagan traditions of Moab, Ruth's encounter with the God of Israel was transformative. By embracing faith, she became a beacon of God's love and power, showcasing her devotion to Him. Remarkably, Ruth, the woman from Moab, is acknowledged as one of the eminent women listed in the lineage of Jesus Christ, as noted in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. This inclusion underscores her significance and the profound impact of her faith journey, demonstrating how God's grace can elevate anyone, regardless of their past, to play a pivotal role in His grand narrative.